As a fantasy football player, do you ever wonder why we can't have nice things? I mean, everyone is hurt. Random players are having random point explosions weekly. We have inconsistent studs, and now we have to worry about bye weeks. I mean, I don't know about you, but it sure feels like fantasy football is out there giving us the finger. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't like it one bit. That's why in today's show, I'm talking about over 25 players that may be on your waiver wire right now. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everyone is doing well out there today. Now, before we get into all the players in today's show, I need some positive vibes from the community. I only need 24 receiving yards tonight from Devon Achane to hit it big on Underdog, so please send me all those positive vibes. Now, if you want in on all the fun, it's not too late to sign up for Underdog now. Head over to Underdog Fantasy or download the app, create a new account using the referral code Headliners. When you do so, all you gotta do is make your minimum $10 deposit, and they're gonna give you a first-time deposit bonus of up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Plus, you're also gonna get discounted picks and promos all week long, and then you can come alongside me and sweat the picks together. So don't wait any longer. We've been having a lot of fun with it here the last 18 months or so, so come join me over on Underdog and let's dominate the rest of the season. But now let's hop in to today's show. We're going to cover some of the top injuries, 5 things we learned from week 4 fantasy football, the upcoming bye weeks, and then the waiver wire as well. But be sure to stick around to the end because I'm also going to be giving you a few players that you no longer need that you can just drop to the waiver wire. But let's go ahead and start it off talking about some injuries first because there were some big name guys that got banged up in week 4. And right at the top of the list, we got Anthony Richardson, quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts. I know a lot of people don't want to start him in fantasy football right now, but he did suffer a hip injury. Does not sound major. Sounds like he could have even returned to the game in week 4 had they needed him to, so he more than likely will be there week 5. A lot of us kind of want to see Joe Flacco for another week, though, because he definitely moved the ball down the field with ease to the likes of Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. So if Anthony Richardson wants to take a week or 2 off, I'm sure some fantasy owners would be okay with that right now. How about Christian Watson? He's injured. Again, shocker, right? I mean, I don't think anybody is surprised that he's hurt once again. It happens almost every single year. Now he's dealing with a high ankle sprain, more than likely going to go on the IR and miss some time. Then we had Taysom Hill. He took away a huge day from Alvin Kamara with a couple goal line carries, but then he suffered an abdominal injury and more than likely is going to miss some time, which means Alvin Kamara should get all those carries back, which is great because he's already getting all kinds of volume. And then we get into some heavy hitters. What about Rashee Rice with the feared torn ACL? More than likely done for the year. Officially at the time of this recording, that hasn't been announced, but it's highly likely that that's the injury. And man, this hurts the Chiefs offense. They lost Hollywood Brown. They lost Isaiah Pacheco. Now they've lost Rashee Rice. Things are different in Kansas City, even though they keep winning. And then lastly, Jonathan Taylor, another Colt here on the list. He suffered a high ankle sprain, more than likely going to miss a couple weeks as well. Now, whether or not he goes on IR, that's what we're kind of waiting to find out, but we know we're probably not going to have him for the foreseeable future here for the Indianapolis Colts, which absolutely sucks. But now let's transition over to some of the things that we learned from just last week. The first one, the Washington Commanders are one of the best teams in the NFC. It is what it is. They went out and mushroom stamped the Arizona Cardinals. They've scored 38 points now in back-to-back games. Terry McLaurin is now fully involved in this offense, and Jaden Daniels is looking like the rookie of the year in the NFL. The Commanders are super fun to watch right now. How about this one? The only difference between Andy Dalton and Tom Brady is red hair. Yes, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but Andy Dalton has almost 550 yards and 5 touchdowns in 2 starts with the Carolina Panthers. I think at this point, a lot of people have just forgotten about Bryce Young. Andy Dalton is by far looking like the better quarterback in Carolina right now. How about this one? The sleeper season is in full force. Now, some of my biggest off-season sleepers this year were Chris Godwin, Khalil Shakir, Rashid Shaheed, Chase Brown, Xavier Leggett, Dontavian Wicks, Trey Tucker, and Jaden Daniels. I think they're turning out pretty well thus far. Now, did anyone expect names like that to be as involved as they are only 4 weeks into the season? Maybe not, but with all the injuries and the inconsistencies right now in the NFL game, these guys are absolute potential studs rest of season. Next point here, Jonathan Gannon of the Arizona Cardinals needs to be fired. And let me be clear here. I don't expect the Arizona Cardinals to be 4-0 right now. I don't expect them to go out and win most weeks, but I definitely expect more from this overall offense. They're getting a little bit too cute. You're not that good of a team to be that cute on Sundays. They're not utilizing their best players enough. Look what the Giants are doing with Malik Neighbors. Everyone on planet Earth knows he's going to see 10+ targets. Marvin Harrison Jr., not so much. We'll feed him every once in a while. It's just plain stupidity. If I'm going to lose a ball game, I'm going to lose it with my best players having the opportunity. Because the last thing I want to do is lose a ball game and be like, at least we got Elijah Higgins a couple targets. It's just a loser's mentality, and Jonathan Gannon needs to go. And then lastly, the Kansas City Chiefs now are going to be forced to use Travis Kelce more than they wanted to in the regular season. With the loss of Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown and Isaiah Pacheco, start to expect Travis Kelce to get peppered once again, which absolutely sucks because for me, he's been a must avoid most of the year. He's been on the trading block for multiple weeks because they didn't really need him when they had all these offensive weapons, but now they're probably not going to have a choice. They really wanted to give him a lesser role, keep him healthy all 17 games, and then unleash him in the playoffs. Now it looks like he's going to have to be used more just due to all the injuries they're sustaining on the offensive side of the football. Now, like I also said in my opening, there's a few teams on bye this week. We have the Detroit Lions, the Tennessee Titans, Philadelphia Eagles, and Los Angeles Chargers. So for the Lions, we're not going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, or Jamison Williams. For the Titans, we're not going to have Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, or DeAndre Hopkins. The Eagles, no Jalen Hurts, no A.J. Brown, no Devontae Smith, no Saquon Barkley, and no Dallas Goedert, because right now, yes, I'm feeling a tad bit fancy. And then the Chargers, I guess you'll be without J.K. Dobbins. I don't know if we're really starting anyone else consistently. I'm not even starting J.K. Dobbins consistently. Maybe a Lad McConkey. Other than that, though, not a whole lot of fantasy pieces for the Chargers that we're going to miss in week 5, which means now we can dive into the waiver wire. Let's start off at the quarterback position. And we got 4, maybe 5 quarterbacks to talk about here this week. The first one being Justin Fields. He's only owned in 41% of leagues. Now he's going against Dallas here this week. He has gotten progressively better over the last 3 weeks of the season. Now, Arthur Smith and his offensive game plan, it's still crap. But with the rushing upside of Justin Fields, he's making up for it. Now a matchup going up against Dallas, who's Big D looking a little bit more shriveled here as of late. Then we got Sam Darnold, who's playing amazing football for the Minnesota Vikings. He's 61% owned in a matchup going up against the Jets. So not an easy matchup for him here this week, but he is the only quarterback in the NFL with over 10 passing touchdowns through 4 weeks of the season. He utilized Jordan Addison right away in his first game back. He's playing great football. Then we got Caleb Williams. He's 65% owned with a great matchup going up against Carolina, and he just missed a few big time plays in week 4 by mere inches. He's playing a little bit better. Really, for me, though, this is all about the matchup. Then we got Andy Dalton, his opponent in that game. So he's going to be traveling to Chicago to face the Bears. Andy Dalton has 5 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks, and this offense looks so much better with him under center than it did with Bryce Young. Now, Andy Dalton actually played for the Chicago Bears a couple years ago, so I'm sure he'd like to go back to Chicago and put some points up on the board in his return. But then I also included Joe Flacco on this list. Now, like I talked about during the injury section, there's a chance that Anthony Richardson returns in week 5. But if he does not, if he is ruled out, Joe Flacco is a decent play in week 5 for sure. He's barely owned anywhere. He's got a matchup going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are dealing with a lot of injuries right now. And Joe Flacco has plenty of weapons in Michael Pittman and Josh Downs, Adonai Mitchell. Jonathan Taylor is also banged up, which means they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more as well. Now, if Anthony Richardson is 100% and they say he's going to start, then maybe we don't add Joe Flacco. But if he's ruled out for any reason, he is definitely somebody that I would stream in week 5 if need be. But now we'll transition to running back, where we got 9 guys we're going to be talking about here this week. The first one is Kareem Hunt. He has to be utilized in this offense more, right? With so many injuries, Someone's got to touch the football. Kareem Hunt led this backfield in touches with 16 last week. You expect that to continue. Now, it shows he's only owned in 38% of leagues, which is crazy to me, but we pulled that number directly off a sleeper. So if you don't like it, email them, not us. But with a matchup this week going up against the New Orleans Saints, Kareem Hunt is going to have a role. Is he going to be inside my top 12 rankings? Probably not. But with 16 plus touches a week, he's probably going to be inside the top 24. Then we got Bucky Irving, who I've talked about on this show multiple times. I've even put him on the thumbnail of this show before just to get more people to pick him up. And now his ownership percentage is up to 62%. So it's climbing, but it's not high enough yet. Go check your waiver wire for Bucky Irving. He has a matchup this week going up against Atlanta. And he's a guy who's hovering right around 10 fantasy points per game, but only getting 10 touches per game. With Rachaad White still somewhat struggling and not 100% healthy, if he misses any time, Bucky Irving is going to go boom. But he's not the only guy that I've talked about a lot this year. How about Chase Brown? And this one right here is like a proud father moment, right? I had Chase Brown in the draft guide as a potential breakout sleeper. I've talked about him all off season long, and now people are starting to understand why after what they saw from him in week 4. He's currently only owned in 56% of leagues. A tough matchup this week going up against Baltimore, but can you imagine if Zach Moss were to go down? And then ask yourself this question. How about this? How often does Zach Moss go down? And the answer is basically yearly. You don't have to study football to go watch tape and see that Chase Brown is an explosive running back who, if he gets more touches, is going to put up massive numbers. I love Chase Brown so much, I'm actually going to make him my self-res pickup of the week. Now, every team needs a self-res at some point. No, I'm not talking Fortnite. I'm not talking Call of Duty. I'm talking about coffee, something I love. And self-res is an amino acid infused coffee which delivers more than just caffeine. It's made with organic coffee beans and includes an amino acid called L-tyrosine. Now, maybe you're saying, what the hell is that? Well, it's known to enhance cognitive function, increase energy, improve your mood, and even reduce stress. All things I need. But it gets even better. They're actually a veteran-owned company, and we would love to support them. So if you're looking for some coffee with a little bit of an added boost, head over to selfrescoffee.com and throw yourself a lifeline right now. There are links down below in the description of this video. So yeah, get yourself some coffee and some Chase Brown and thank me later. Next guy up on the list is Braylon Allen, another name who's been on this show for multiple weeks, and I'm going to continue to include him. He's only 62% owned as of right now, a matchup coming up against the Minnesota Vikings. And while the Jets offense as a whole just looked bad last week, Braylon Allen is still getting right around 10 touches a ball game. And what happens if Breece Hall goes down? You're noticing a theme here, right? With all the injuries we're seeing in fantasy football so far in this young season, some of these backup running backs have bigger roles than had expected to have at this point of the season. They have some flex value, but if their stud in front of them goes down, we're talking about a league-winning running back, which then takes us down to Trey Sermon next. And I don't know if I want to call him a league winner by any means, but he is who is in line to get immediate touches now due to the injury of Jonathan Taylor. He's only owned in 4% of leagues. A matchup this week going up against Jacksonville. He's not the most efficient running back, but he should see volume. To me, the bigger question here is the question at the quarterback position. If it's Joe Flacco, I actually like Trey Sermon a little bit more. If it's Anthony Richardson, I think we're in line for some up and down performances that really kind of harm us more than help us in fantasy football, but he is in line for immediate touches if you need immediate help. Then we go down to Justice Hill, and I had to add him after the Sunday night football game. He's only owned in 28% of leagues. Now a matchup going up against Cincinnati, and I don't know if you noticed or not, but when Justice Hill is on the field, he looks like he's playing at a different speed than everyone else. Now, obviously, this is King Henry's backfield, but like I've already said, what happens if anything happens to Derrick Henry? Justice Hill looks like an absolute man on a mission when he touches the football. It's almost like 10 yards guaranteed when he touches the football, and then they're throwing him wheel routes down the sideline. Justice Hill probably needs to be on more fantasy teams right this second. Then we go down to Isaac Guerendo of the San Francisco 49ers, only owned in 6% of leagues. Now a matchup going up against Arizona. This one for me is really just next man up mentality. If you own Jordan Mason, I would consider consider having Isaac Guerendo on the bottom of your bench just in case something happens to Jordan Mason. Then we go down to Emmanuel Wilson. He's 30% owned going up against the Los Angeles Rams this week, and really he's just another handcuff. He's an insurance policy for Josh Jacobs, who's still touching the ball every single game. He only had one carry less than Josh Jacobs this past week. It's really crazy to me how many handcuffed running backs right now have a big enough role to be somewhat flex-worthy with all the injuries we're dealing with. But then we go down to the last guy on the list. It's Roschon Johnson of the Chicago Bears, owned in 44% of leagues, now going up against Carolina. Not a bad matchup. His quote-unquote extended role that he was going to be getting in week 4, that turned out to be 7 carries for 26 yards and a touchdown, really saved by that touchdown, wasn't involved in the passing game whatsoever. Really, DeAndre Swift exploded, and maybe whatever future chance Roschon Johnson had is now going to be delayed by a couple weeks. But he is a player that has the potential. He just needs the opportunity. I'm just not so sure yet that he has as much of an opportunity as the guys above him here on the list. But now let's transition to wide receivers, and I got 10 guys we got to get through here. Xavier Leggett is top on the list. He was in this show last week. Hopefully you added him. Hopefully you used him, but only 38% owned as of right now in a matchup going up against Chicago, and people need to listen closely. Go grab Xavier Leggett if you have him on your waiver wire. With Andy Dalton under center and an Adam Thielen injury, now is the time for Xavier Leggett. He had 10 targets this past week, and I really don't see how that's going to change going forward. How about Wan'Dale Robinson? It's a long time coming for me to add a giant here to the list, but he deserves it. He's only 46% owned in a matchup this upcoming week against the Seattle Seahawks, and really he's turned into a PPR stud. He's getting a ton of targets. Now, they're not going very far past the line of scrimmage. It's really all on his shoulders to gain hardly any yardage that he gets. But 38 targets in 4 games, and he's the check down binky to Daniel Jones. If you're in a PPR format, he needs to be on your roster. How about Dontavian Wicks? Another proud dad moment for me because I talked up this guy so much this offseason and said, once we see an injury to a Green Bay wide receiver, Wicks is going to get a chance. And then Christian Watson went down and Dontavian Wicks went the hell off. Only 18% owned. Now a matchup going up against the Rams. It was only really a matter of time, right? We knew Christian Watson was going to get hurt at some point. Once he went down, Dontavian Wicks 13 targets last week, 5 catches, 78 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, I want to have a little bit of fun with this one. So if you were here this offseason and you heard all my rants about Dontavian Wicks, I want you to throw hashtag I was here down below in the comment section. I'm curious to see how many people are watching the waiver wire show that have been checked in all offseason long. Then we go down to Darnell Mooney. Now he's 67% owned in a matchup going up against Tampa Bay. Now last week, Darnell Mooney only had 3 catches for 56 yards, but drew numerous downfield penalties and has completely taken Kyle Pitts out of this Atlanta offense. Kirk Cousins is looking the way of Darnell Mooney, Drake London, and Bijan Robinson, and outside of that, not a whole lot. Now, at some point throughout this season, some of those big plays are actually going to happen and not be taken away by pass interference, so definitely have Darnell Mooney on your roster if possible. Then we have Trey Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders. He's only 18% owned. Now he's got a matchup going up against Denver. He's staying on the field more and more every week, but he's really benefiting from injuries on this offense, right? Devontae Adams missing time, and if that's the case for an extended period of time, Trey Tucker is getting more targets. Then we have Josh Downs. He's only 29% owned in a matchup going up against Jacksonville, and if we could have Joe Flacco playing, Josh Downs may be a weekly must-start guy. We really don't know about that just yet, so if you add Josh Downs, he's a little bit more of bench depth at this point until we get more information. Now, Anthony Richardson does go down for multiple weeks. We can fire him up. Then we have a couple Jets, Allen Lazard and Mike Williams. For Allen Lazard, I mean, overall, this offense is hard to watch for the Jets, but Allen Lazard seems to be the guy that Aaron Rodgers looks to almost first in his progression every single time. But now we're starting to see Mike Williams get up to game speed a little bit. He's starting to learn the playbook. Rodgers is starting to trust him down the field a little bit more. Now, really, when it comes to these guys, they are going to be added bench depth, not immediate starts. They are 2 guys that benefited this past week because Garrett Wilson was covered by Patrick Surtain. But they still need some attention here in fantasy football if you are starving for wide receivers. Then we have Tutu Atwell, who's been on this show since the injuries of Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, and a lot of people just see Tutu Atwell and they're like, I'm not really interested. you probably should be a little bit more interested. He's only 16% owned, a matchup coming up against Green Bay, and even though people kind of look down on Tutu, he's averaged 4 catches for 87 yards over his last 2 ball games, and that is exactly who Matthew Stafford is looking for down the field. Now, I'm sorry, he's not going to be a 10-catch kind of guy, but he gets yards in chunks. And in an upcoming matchup this week against the Green Bay Packers, he's going to have an opportunity to get some of that chunk yardage once again. Which then takes us down to the last guy on the list. It's Juju Smith-Schuster of the Kansas City Chiefs, only 2% owned right now in a matchup going up against New Orleans. And really, someone is going to have to step up in this passing offense. Is it Juju Smith-Schuster? Is it Justin Watson? Well, in the past, we've kind of seen this before a couple years ago. Watson, a little bit more of that deep play guy, that guy that can get you a couple catches for maybe 50 or 60 yards, where Juju could be the guy that absorbs some of that volume underneath and racks up more receptions. Now, why do I not have Juju higher, knowing that they definitely need wide receivers in Kansas City? He's not a true number 1 guy. And now that he's going to be, quote unquote, the number 1 guy in this offense, he's going to command a lot of defensive attention. And that's something he struggled with in his career the last few years. Now, could he be somebody that racks up right around 6 catches for 60 yards a week and the occasional touchdown? Maybe. Not a super high ceiling, but maybe the floor is a little bit safer. He's not someone I would start in week 5, but I would definitely add him to the bottom of my bench if I'm needy at the wide receiver position. Which gets us through wide receivers. Now we're going to transition over to tight ends, the football kind, where I got a couple guys to look at. Listen, this position is an absolute train wreck. We're just trying to find some guys that could potentially see some targets at this point. At the top of the list, it's Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, only 18% owned in a matchup going up against Atlanta. He has back-to-back games now with at least 8 targets and 6 receptions. Not a whole lot of yardage. He's barely getting 50 yards a week, but that is definitely something at the tight end position. Then we go down to Juwan Johnson of the New Orleans Saints. He's only 5% owned in a matchup going up against Kansas City. We know Kansas City typically struggles against tight ends. We also know that Taysom Hill is hurt, and Foster Moreau had no involvement in the passing game just this past week. Olave, he was seen limping almost the entire second half of that ball game. We could see more Juwan Johnson in week 5. The potential is there. Then we have Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers. He's only 8% owned in a matchup going up against the Rams. He just had 9 targets, 6 catches, 53 yards, and a touchdown, as well as a 2-point conversion. Now, the game script last week definitely helped, right? They were trailing Minnesota majority of the game. They had to throw a lot, but he's definitely getting more targets and more looks, more opportunities right now than Luke Musgrave. So if you need a tight end in week 5, Tucker Kraft is an option, as well as Eric All Jr. of the Cincinnati Bengals, only 3% owned, going up against Baltimore. He's had exactly 4 targets and 4 receptions now in 3 straight ball games. The yardage, somewhat minimal, but if you're throwing a desperation dart, Eric All is at least seeing a few balls each and every week. Which will take us to some defenses. Honestly, not a whole lot out there that I absolutely love that are going to be widely available for people. I threw in the Washington Commanders, who are just playing great football overall right now. They have a matchup going up against the Cleveland Browns, whose offense is pretty meh at times. And then the Las Vegas Raiders. This one is just about matchup. They're going up against the Denver Broncos, who look like absolute dog water against the Jets this past week. Bo Nix did not look good at all. Sure, maybe weather was somewhat of a factor, but hopefully the Vegas defense can just keep the score low in this ball game and give you a decent week if you need to stream somebody. Which now only leaves us the section of a few players that we can now drop on our fantasy teams if you still own them. The first one is Mike Gesicki, tight end of the Cincinnati Bengals, currently 53% owned, but like we just mentioned, Eric All is getting more consistent targets than Mike Gesicki is, and now that T. Higgins is healthy, Mike Gesicki isn't needed as much. How about Ezekiel Elliott? Dude is washed, right? He's not doing anything in this backfield. Rico Dowdle is getting the bulk of the touches. Zeke's still 64% owned. I would rather have one of the guys that we talked about in the waiver wire portion of the running back position here today than Ezekiel Elliott. Jahan Dotson, sure, they're on bye, but that's not why I'm dropping him. They had a perfect opportunity to utilize Jahan Dotson last week with so many injuries. Didn't happen. If it's not going to happen then, we expect A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith back after the bye week, so now we no longer need Jahan Dotson. Christian Watson, I'm dropping him if you got him. He's 66% owned right now. More than likely, he's going on the IR, and with so many injuries in the NFL, I would almost guess that your IR spot is already full, and I'm not wasting a bench spot on Christian Watson. Jalen Naylor. Love Jalen Naylor. Really wish he could have consistent volume each week, but now with Jordan Addison back, that's going to be a little bit more hit or miss. Gabe Davis. Why do 40% of people own Gabe Davis? Just drop Gabe Davis. You don't need Gabe Davis. It's Christian Kirk, it's Brian Thomas Jr., and eventually Evan Ingram is going to be back here in the near future. We don't need Gabe Davis. And then lastly, for the 34% of you who still own Blake Corum of the Los Angeles Rams, feel free to drop him. Even Ronnie Rivers is touching the football right now, not Blake Corum, even though this offense is decimated with injuries. So if you got Blake Corum and you need something else, he's okay to drop as well. So there you have over 25 players that may be available on your waiver wire right now that can help your fantasy football team. I know injuries suck, but we have to prepare. It's not like all of a sudden the NFL is going to turn the injury slider to off and everything's going to get better. Utilizing the waiver wire correctly is a great way to keep your fantasy football team moving in the right direction. Now I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day though, but hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day. Good luck in fantasy football here this week. Good luck with your waiver claims, and then do your part to make the world a better place.